and the pep in your feet, 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 feet. I got some real questions to ask you now. Do you think we might change the world one move at a time? I got some real blessings to share around. Having you by my side makes it all worthwhile, while you wait for the world to change. You wait for the world to change. You wait for the world to change. While we wait for the world to change, while we're hoping, hoping, hoping. Stone bona fly, fly. I'm an angel of the morning too. Promise that the dawn will bring you. I'm the melody and the space between every note the swallow sings. I'm 14 vultures circling. I'm that crawling down thin on the smoke up above the trees, good Lord. The fire and the branch that's burning low. Maybe you were sleeping, Lord, but maybe she's not weeping no more. Yeah, I'm a midnight ride, stone bona fine, fly. I'm an angel of the morning too. Promise that the dawn will bring you. In the sick light of the hurricane's eye, I'm a violent lullaby. I'm 6 fireflies, 1 street light. I'm a suffocating summer night. I'm each of the steps on the stairway. I'm a shadow in the doorframe. I'm a tap, tap of a lunar moth on the stair beat on his bed. like me, Lord. Nothing from the air, nothing from the sea. Not a God Almighty. Hey, I'm a midnight ride, storm born of fire, not fire. I'm an angel of the morning too. The promise that the dawn will bring you. I'm the wounded bird, I'm the screaming heart. I'm the one who can't be counted out. I'm the dove thrown into bed. I can roll and shake and rattle. I'm the moon's dark side, I'm the solar flare. The child of the earth, the child of the air. I am the mother of the evening star. I am the love that conquers all. Yeah, I'm a midnight rider, storm born of fire, not fire. I'm an angel of the morning too. The promise that the dawn will bring you. Yeah, I'm a midnight rider, storm born of fire, not fire. I'm an angel of the morning too. Promise that the dawn will bring you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome.
Settling in. Got extra pillow today because I want to be comfy.
And taller.
And taller. But yeah, welcome everyone. I hope you're all comfy as well.
Yes, we invite you to make yourselves as cozy a space as you can. I love seeing the introductions in the chat. Speaking of which, hi, I'm Paula. I will be one of your co-hosts this evening for Groundswell's Value Slow Work event.
Do you want to do any more intro? Share more about who you are?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Groundswell's Director of Ecosystem Development. I live on Nechlalaquam, which is also known as Bowen Island on unceded Squamish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Seychelles territories. And my background is French Canadian. My mother's family has been in so-called Canada for many, many generations, 300 years or 250 years. And my father is an Italian immigrant. So two sort of fiery cultures collide. And I love my role of hosting events at Groundswell. And I'm very excited to be sharing that with you today, Daniela, who we have worked together in the past at Groundswell, but Daniela just rejoined our team very recently.
Yep.
And you're jumping right in. Yeah, so super happy to be here with you today.
Yay, thanks. I'm excited to be here with you as well, because yeah, it's my first time I feel in front of the camera officially.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit daunting. So yes, like Paula said, my name is Daniela. I use she, they pronouns, and I am a queer Latinx settler femme on the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I moved here when I was 2 from Central America. My father is from Honduras and my mother is from Costa Rica. And we carry a lot of mixed ancestry. So we're not sure where that comes
from due to assimilation, erasure, and colonization. But 23andMe told me my ancestors are European from the continent of Africa and indigenous to the Americas. So that is me. And with that, I'd like to share why I am grateful to be on this land that we're on today. I think a lot of the lessons that I take into my day-to-day come from reflecting on nature. Not that I'm great at doing this all the time, because capitalism got me.
Not everybody.
And I'm like, I gotta get it done. But when I do have time for pause or make time for pause, I always have time for pause. I don't always take it. It goes back to nature and, you know, what cycles are happening in the seasons and in the night and day and in the growth of new plants and in just the circle of life. And so that makes me just reflect on, you know, where do I fit into this and how have I changed my role in this ecosystem due to other ways that I've been taught. And so I'm grateful to the land, to the caregivers of the land that have kept it alive and well for me to learn these lessons firsthand living here on these lands where we have so much nature all around us. So yes, I'm grateful to be here with you and growing in this practice of what slow work looks like for all of us, because I'm sure we're all doing it differently.
Yes. Yeah. Slow work might feel like, what? We don't have time for slow work. Yeah, I know it's definitely like a learning edge. Can we call it that? A learning edge for me. Yeah, we're super lucky to have all sorts of folks with us this evening who are making it happen and learn from them and also learn from a bunch of resources that we'll be sharing over the course of the event. But I want to get some housekeeping out of the way. So I want to bring your attention to a couple things. This is a webinar, so you will just see the speakers on screen, not the other attendees. But we encourage you to chat in the chat. So you can have access there. You can share whatever's coming up or whatever is happening for you in the chat, react, whatever you like. But if you have a question, either a technical question like, something's not working, or a question for the speakers, please use the Q&A function, just so we can see them in the chat. Sometimes it can be hard to pick them out from like an active chat box. So yeah, please use the Q&A. And I also want to bring your attention to the live transcript closed captioning option. We have, yes, Lee is captioning live this evening. So if you click on that, you can click view subtitle, or you can also click view full transcript if you want to, like, oh, I just missed something that was said a minute ago or something. You can go there. And we have very technical questions. What were the songs played in the opening? Very technical, very important question. So opening us up was Dominique Fils-Agny with While We Wait and Alison Russell's Night Flyer. So those were the songs, and we will be sharing a link to the playlist. In fact, Groundswell Radio, all of our favorite songs, including those. We can drop that into the chat, and we'll also have a crowdsourced collage that we're going to invite you to add to, and you'll also find the songs and the artists that we're playing tonight in there. Yeah, and Samita, I just want to introduce you to some behind the scenes people. So Samita is our colleague at Groundswell, and she'll be doing support in the chat. So she'll be responding to the chat questions and the Q&As and bringing anything to our attention or the speaker's attention. And there you go, Samita's just putting all the important information in the chat right now. I think that's it for our housekeeping stuff.
Cool, thanks you.
Yeah.
So, why the topic of slow work? So one of the things that I didn't mention was I am very new here. I am the director of education. And one of the things that has popped out to me as I've gotten to be part of the team and figure out what slow work means for me is thinking of, again, going back to plants. That's kind of where I usually defer to, and just thinking of what does it look like to grow something together. And if in the environment everything is relational, what do relationships look like here in the workplace and with partners and with the folks that participate. So this is also one of Groundswell's 4 principles that guides the programming, the culture, and the collaborations on this panel, which is valuing slow work. We want to explore how slowing down allows us to take time and energy necessary to value the work of purpose, the work of relationships, the work of creativity, and the work of care. Things we need to value if we're going to build alternative futures that work for everyone. And I learned a new word this week actually, prefigurative futures.
Ooh.
And so I think of future bubbles, which is when I get to be in a space with folks that are looking to create the future they want to live in and experience it today in practice. So what does it look like right now as we're talking about slow work to also be settling into slow work? And that's what a prefigurative future is to bring that into today and live in that bubble.
Oh, love it.
For now.
Bubble is easier for me to understand, but yes.
Yes. But it's a big word that I can now Google. I didn't know I could Google this word.
That's great. Yeah, bubble. I don't know what bubble would show up in the Google.
Yeah, future bubble, no.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, so here we are inviting you into our bubble. And yeah, we're gonna try to do things a little differently here. I'm sure there's been lots of Zooming and webinaring in your life recently. And so here we are again. But we want to see like how many of our senses can we bring into this space, even if we're in front of a computer. So one practice I want to share is something that our organizational therapist shared with us, is of sort of not necessarily being glued to this like rectangle on the screen in front of you, which is easy. You're looking, you're engaged, hopefully, but to like, remember you're in this greater expansive space outside and sort of sensing the dimensions of the space you're in, looking down and be like, oh yeah, there's ground, there's floor, there's ceiling, there's corners, maybe there's a window, and just, remembering that greater sense of space that your body is in, this 3-dimensional space outside of the screen. And I'll give you, a sense of how we're going to try to bring in different senses over the course of the next 2 hours. One is with some conversation seeders. So we have 2 special guests who are actually both very recent participants in Groundswell's Leadership for Social Change course. So this is where we help people put their values to work. So we will have Danielle Soucy and Rita Dixon taking a few minutes each to share some personal experiences in multi-sensory ways. I don't want to really give away too much, so I'll just stop there. And then, this is just something to open up the space, open up your other senses, awaken your senses besides sort of the typical ones we engage especially when we're in front of our computers. And this isn't just the 5 senses. This is our sense of all sorts of senses of being, our sense of belonging, our sense of connection, more than just your typical like smell, taste, ears, eyes, touch. I think that's fine. More than those. I was using this one, but and then we will introduce you to our guest speakers, Jacqueline Jennings, Laura Kozak, and Vidya, who is Groundswell's CEO and lead educator. So we get to hear more from Vidya as well during this event. get into some questions and conversation, and then we'll invite you to participate with us in creating a multisensory collage through a shared Google slide that you'll all have access to. We'll play some music. And yeah, if you have any questions at any time, please do drop them in the Q&A and we'll pick them out of there over the course of the event as well. I think that's it for setting the stage.
Cool.
Yeah.
Then I'll just invite you to get comfy. And for that, I
Yay.
stole this. I think this is Vidya's. I don't know whose it is.
Yeah.
But
It's
we'll
all
do some
ours.
spraying. So it smells nice in this space. And it like hit my
That's so
back, so I'm feeling refreshed. We have our little diffuser going. So it's smelling nice in here. I'm gonna get my blanket. So that
Let's see. Oh, is this mirrored?
ooh,
I'm not sure what this looks like on the screen.
it'll show up. So that I'm comfy.
This is the spray. I can't read it because it's backwards for me. The Squatland Botanicals Calming Room Spray with lavender and clary sage. It's Indigenous owned, Squamish-based business, and it's delicious.
It smells good. And I got my drink. So I just invite y'all to observe what you have around you as well and how you're settling into this space and slowing down and grounding.
Yes, and to help us do this, Danielle is going to bring us into her space. So Danielle, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Hi. So I wanted to share spinning with you because for me it's a meditation, and it kind of brings me into the here and now, and it's an hour a day where I can just kind of settle, and the creaky sound of the wheel turning and the old pedal that kind of has this little click to it. It's that monotonous sort of ongoing sound that I really actually enjoy. So my name's Danielle Susi. I'm a natural dye and textile artist. I live on the Tinglau of the Snacks First Nations. And I have a slideshow here, so I will share my screen and then we can get into it. Can everyone see that?
Looks great, Danielle.
Okay. So this I love so dearly. Their names are Penny and Theo. We live in Argenta, which is a community of 100 people. We're roughly 40 minutes from the nearest village, which is called Caslow. And over the course of my life, I'm from Ontario, and I have found that I've been moving to smaller and smaller, more rural areas, and the city life just doesn't quite suit me. Every time I move to a smaller place, I
Danielle, your sound,
and that's what I see.
Danielle, your video froze and your sound was a little bit garbled. Do you want to go off video while you're screen sharing
Yes, definitely.
and then come on when the screen share's over? Okay, I think that might help.
Okay, let's give that a try.
All right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what you heard last, but basically I've been seeking more rural settings, and since I moved here, I've had this space and place to tune in and start gardening, and from that just fell in love with growing plants and started exploring natural dyes and got animals, and I'm now working in unison with those plants and those animals to create place-based art. So this is Penny and Theo. We every springtime shear them and then process their fleece to make into shawls and ponchos. First, their fleece gets teased and then curded, and then I make them into roll legs, and then I spin the yarn. So what I was just doing there on video was actually the fourth part of the process. So there's a bit of processing of their wool before it gets to that stage. I think what I love about this art is that it speaks to my introverted self. I have a lot of time alone, and it's slow and methodical, each sort of process, part of the process. And I'm able to tune into each part of that. You know, I get to feel the wool between my fingers, and sometimes it's dirty, and as each part of the process goes on, it gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, and you watch the colors change. And so it's very tactile and visual. Learning to spin really speaks to that tactile sensitivity, because it requires these little, like, you know, when you sometimes have aha moments. With spinning, it's like these aha moments of tactile sensitivity. So like you feel the wool go slightly past your fingers, and then it'll pull out into this beautiful draft, and then you're like, oh, I get it. But it takes hours to get to that moment of those ahas. So you just sit there in silence for hours until you find those aha moments, and it's wonderful. And sometimes I bring it out into the forest to spin. So when it comes to harvesting dye plants, I both harvest dye plants from the wild. So like here, I'm harvesting St. John's wort, which yields a nice soft purple dye. In the springtime, I'll harvest nettles right when they're like just popping up from the ground, and it's just the tops. You go and cut them just above a node, and then they'll grow back. You know, you kind of work with the plant to make sure that it grows back really well, and you only take so much so that you're not depleting the patch. And I've been going back to the same patch for a few years now, and it yields this nice soft green dye. And then birch bark is one that I love working with as well. It's a beautiful pink color. It's harvested in the springtime when the sap is running. So the timing of harvesting dye plants is pretty crucial to which color you're going to get from that plant or that material. So usually if I find a fallen birch in the springtime, then that's when I can release something in a birch collection, say. So here's what it would look like in the dye pot. And then I also grow dye plants in my garden to attain colors that don't grow native to this area. So like Japanese indigo is one of my favorites. I'll start the seeds 6 weeks before last frost in the springtime, and then I'll tend them until the heat of midsummer. So I'll fertilize them twice a week with fish fertilizer and, you know, keep them well watered. And then once it's right at the heat of summer, that's when the indigotin content is the highest. So I'll harvest them and start extracting. So on the right there, you'll see there's like this sheen on top. That's what you're looking for. That's when the plants are fermented enough to start extracting the indigotin out. And then you
Oh, we lost your audio for a second there, Danielle. Danielle, maybe. Let's see if I can get her attention.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, the sound got a little garbled again there.
Just when you were talking about how you extract
joys
the
of rural
indigo.
Ontario. Okay.
Oh no, did we just lose Danielle completely? Danielle, this is rural life. Danielle actually moved to a different location where there was stronger internet, but maybe not strong enough for the power of this event and the screen sharing and the video and all those things. A lot going on. Yes, thank you for the valuing slow presentations, Sharon. Okay, we're gonna give Danielle some time to come back and finish their presentation. Rita, would you like to come on down?
Hello, absolutely, I will. Yeah, so that was so interesting. I hope we get to see the rest. That was wonderful. Yeah, so I want to just start by situating myself on the land. And I'm actually going to turn on a timer here to make sure that I stay within the limits, because I feel there's so much to say on this topic. So I am of Jamaican descent, the first member of my family born in Canada. And I guess I identify as African diaspora. I tend to pronounce that word differently than others. You know, we're scattered globally. So we are, we see ourselves as a stolen people living on stolen land. So I, you know, really want to just express today how much I appreciate being able to live on this unceded land. I personally live in a housing co-op, which has been a wonderful experience for me for the last 20 years. Living in a city where housing is so scarce, so hard to hold on to. I feel most richly blessed to have the experience of living in a housing co-op. And again, you know, we experience the irreversible impacts of colonialism, and just share that understanding with the people who gave up this land that we could live on. So I'm coming to you today from East Vancouver, specifically the lands of the Coast Salish, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Stolo, Stuminus, and Musqueam peoples. And what I want to talk to you about today, what I've been asked to share with you is, it's a little bit of a downer at first, but there's an upside at the finale. So basically, I've had to take a departure from my planned career path. And it's actually been several years that I've been off that career path. This was unexpected. It caught me off guard. And for much of this time, my goal has been regaining psychological wellness. So those aren't things that I love to say. They're not easy things to say publicly. And it could be a little bit of the reason why I felt just constant butterflies today. And even in speaking with you and connecting with you, I'm feeling like, just like it's a big topic for me to share about, but I think really important, and I'm excited to be a part of this panel. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the work of author Ian Williams. You may know of his work. He recently has written a Giller Prize nominated book, shortlisted book, by the name of Disorientation: Being Black in the World. And what Ian Williams says is how he defines disorientation is in this way. A disrupting interaction or experience enacted upon a racialized individual who is minding their own business. And so at the point of when they're minding their own business, they're confronted with a false sense of their own race. And he specifically says, disorientation has the potential to halt the forward momentum of one's life. And so that, that really has been the experience that I've had. Experiencing this at work threw me for a loop. And so the first portion of what I want to talk about was, I guess one name you would give it is depression. How did I deal with this being removed from my career path? How did I need to rely on slow work to find my way during that time? And how did that reliance on slow work transition? At what point did it shift? And at what point was I able to refocus in on creativity? I have to say, in running through this presentation this afternoon with an individual that I do music with, I'm a singer, I learned a whole lot more about my relationship to slow work and my senses, basically the way that other people experience what I've had to do in order to work in a slower and more present way. So let me get back on track with my presentation. So basically during this initial time of feeling disoriented, I was living, I'd say, deeply inward out of necessity. So, I'd spend half the day doing yoga in my living room. I spent a lot of time meditating. I was still working part-time, and so I really had to, I felt, survive what had happened to me. And that went on for quite a while, for a number of years, which is, again, hard to say publicly, but I think really important. Eventually, the spring of 2020 came around, and the rest of the world seemed to join me. So basically, COVID hit the world, and due to the onset of the global pandemic, I basically saw, it felt like everybody else joined me. And so there were also other things that were occurring in my life that were difficult. So one of them was I had an unexpected sewer backup in my apartment. It was nasty, messy, and stinky. And I had to, oh, this is wonderful. Thank you for your comments as we go along here. I had to move out of my apartment for 4 months as it was rebuilt. So that was a bit of a shock. And I got to move into a great place due to great insurance. So that was nice. But another challenge of that time was, as a performer, as a singer, I was learning, as were other performers, that our passion, our craft, was a hazard. So basically, because singing or playing a woodwind instrument requires deep lung activity, we were considered to be super spreaders. So there was no performance. There was no way that we could gig. So a lot of things happening at once. So this is about the time that my story becomes a little bit more enlightening, I suppose, positive. So thankfully, I remained connected through Facebook to a wonderful community, a swing jazz community that I'm part of. and people's creativity began to take over their social network channels. And I began to realize that if I went deeper into myself, but by choice, if I slowed down and if I took cues from inside me rather than cues from the outer world, I would be able to focus in on creativity. So I began to take my indications of how to move forward from my inner stirrings. It's hard for me to kind of put it into words. What I did outwardly was I bought an app for my phone called Acapella. You might know of it. And I began to create. There were ways that I brought aspects of my world that were kind of unfolding at the time into that process of creativity. So one was that I took some words from a conversation I'd had with my mother. My now late mother, was living in a care home with Alzheimer's. And my main goal at the time was to have her understand that her personal hygiene, her hand washing, her distancing from other residents in the care home were essential, because I really wanted to keep her safe. And one day, after a number of these phone calls, in her beautiful, generous way that my mother had about her, she said to me, "Well, it looks like we really are now our brother's keeper." And those words really just kind of, entered my heart. And I just thought, wow, I really love those words. I love that even though the world seems to be in a panic, we can actually remember each other as we slow down, and we can keep connected. Another thing that happened is that I was sitting down at the beach one day, just kind of being with the waves, being with the water, and a bass line for the song that I wanted to create came to me. I was just, I guess, in the moment, very present. The bass line came to me just as a singing, I'd say with my inner ear, I could hear a bass line, and it came to me in harmony. I went home and I immediately recorded it with this app. And those things kind of came together to create this video that I'm about to share with you. I'm just about out of time, so I just want to say one or two more things about this video. So through the process of creating it, I really had to continue to rely on this inner intuition. So an inner seeing and an inner feeling, or an inner hearing. So in other words, there would be moments of just uncomfortability, like I don't know what's supposed to happen next with this piece that I'm creating, but I know that I can't move forward creatively until I see what's on the screen next, and then I can create what I see, or until I hear the notes that I should sing next. And then I'll just share one more piece of information that I kind of discovered this afternoon in conversation with this friend that I do music with. What was said was, you actually live your whole life in touch with your body in ways that are maybe uncommon, which I didn't really realize that. So I think that I had looked at this need to do yoga, this need to meditate, this need to slow down as evidence of injury, as evidence of trauma from the disorientation that I experienced. And after this discussion with the friend, I'm beginning to examine, are these actually my superpower that I didn't consider? So one example that was given to me was, so I have a gig coming up, and it's, I haven't gigged since February of 2020. So it's kind of exciting. I'm kind of nervous. And this person reminded me, you have a 3-day schedule for getting yourself ready for a gig. So it's actually a written out schedule. I've been doing it for several years because I don't gig a lot. I gig maybe once a month pre-COVID. And my friend basically said, your awareness of your body, it's for you to connect, but it actually I'm getting a little bit off topic. Let me just center for a moment because I want to finish so we can watch the video. I suppose what I want to say, actually, let me read what I wrote down. The feedback that I got from this friend was, in collaborating with you, I know what to play because your connection to your body communicates to me when I should come in, when you're going to go out. So the feedback was really lovely. I love collaborating with you because of your sense of your body. But what I didn't realize was that in improvising the video, so you're going to see a video with 9 Ritas. So it's 9 screens with me singing or moving. And what this friend had me realize was the improvising is 1 Rita with 8 other Ritas. And I didn't get that before. So that really excited me today when I realized that. What I was doing was collaborating with myself. And okay, I guess that's all I want to say about that. I'm going to actually ask Paula to cue the video. Yeah, I guess the main point is that the improvising is the same solo as it is with others, and that was news to me. Thank you.
If Corona comes a knocking, if Corona comes a knocking, if Corona comes a knocking, don't you let 'em in. If Corona comes a knocking, if Corona comes a knocking, if Corona comes a knocking, don't you let 'em in. If Corona comes a knocking, ooh, Corona. If Corona comes a knocking, ah, Corona. If Corona comes a knocking, don't you let 'em in. If Corona comes a knocking, ooh, Corona. If Corona comes a knocking, ah, Corona. If Corona comes a knocking, don't you let 'em in. If Corona comes a knocking, if Corona comes a knocking, if Corona comes a knocking, don't you let 'em in. We've got to think hard and deeper. Now that we are our brothers keeper. We've got to think, and don't you let 'em in. We've got to think hard and deeper. Now that we are our brothers keeper. We've got to think, and don't you let 'em in. We've got to think hard and deeper. Now that we are our brothers keeper. We've got to think, and don't you let 'em in. We've got to think hard and deeper. Now that we are our brothers keeper. We've got to think, and don't you let 'em in.
My Thank you so much. That was fun to watch with you all, and I'm sweating over here, but it was really fun. Thanks.
Wow, that was so cool, Rita. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, it was beautiful to watch. I loved seeing all the different pictures. And then when they started disappearing, I was like, where are they going? It was great.
Thank you. We're gonna let that settle in with folks, and we'll bring back some pieces of Rita's offering there throughout the rest of this evening. But first, we're gonna invite Danielle back on stage and finish off her slideshow with us.
We'll give it another shot.
I have like the clicking of the wheel and Rita's like bass line happening at the same time.
Maybe we should collaborate, Rita.
That would be awesome.
The spinning wheel metronome. Love it.
I'll send you some samples. Yeah. Okay, let's give this another try. As Paula was saying, slow work, slow internet.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was talking about indigo. And here you can see is where the indigo is getting extracted. So it's going through a fermentation process. And it's kind of dependent on the temperature of water. It's like making bread is when it tells you it's ready. So it usually takes about 5 days or so on average once you cut the plants and then put them in water and let them ferment until you kind of know it's ready by the look of the water, and you smell the water. It has this almost pungent smell. You could drink it if you wanted. I have tried it. I like to call it mermaid juice. It brings a little magic into this very science heavy process. And then at this point you can either make a dye and dye fibers right now, or you can decant the water and you have then this almost sludge like paste, and then you can dry that out and you have powder that I could then use in the winter time to dye. So here's an example of some wool that I've spun, and then that pink color is birch bark. Here's various shades of indigo. So the skein on the right is dipped a couple of times. And then it's just been dipped and the bath gets exhausted. So then once I have the dye, the yarn dyed, I go to weaving, and it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg because there's so many parts to the process before you even get to weaving. You have the designing and gardening, loving the alpacas, shearing, fleece processing, spinning, and dyeing, and that's pretty much a good chunk of the process. Then once I'm finished weaving, then I work with my husband, who's a photographer, and some other fellow creatives to bring the life of the shawls to image. And we really love to do photo shoots outdoors because they're made of this place, so we like to bring them out to the place where they were created and inspired by. So these are some indigo shawls. And this is the poncho that I make. Now I didn't dye those fibers. Those are all naturally occurring off the back of the animals. So different kinds of alpacas, which I got from a friend's farm. And I think I love about this work is that it is slow. And through doing this work for the past few years, it's allowed me to take time to appreciate the beautiful things around me. I to notice the quirk my alpacas and how they're both different from one another. They're aloof but quirky and interested in what I'm doing. I notice the designs on the back of bugs that feed in my garden. I love having time to admire the colors of the sunset and tune into the singing streams. I think I said singing streams earlier, but it's one of my favorite terms right now. The alliteration's nice as well. And those things all surround our little homestead. So just kind of tuning into what's around me and feeling inspired by the nature that surrounds me to make this place-based art. It's allowed me to see it's allowed me to see things with different light, and it's helped me to appreciate the little things that fill my days. And what I love most about engaging in place through fiber is how much the seasons dictate my color palettes. So when I work with wool and when I work with the plants, I can't create an indigo shawl unless it's indigo season, or I can't create a birch shawl unless a fallen birch I've come across a fallen birch in the springtime. And so working through this art and working with the seasons, I've learned how to create in rhythm with the seasons and just learn to love that cycle. And that's all I got.
Wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm like, what am I doing with my cheap little blankets?
Or like
Who knows? I need an alpaca one.
Danielle, thank you. You brought so much richness to this space and texture
And color
and the outdoors.
and time.
And yeah, with like Rita's like voice in the background. Thank you both so much. I hope you are all like seeping. I feel like I'm like sinking into my senses with all of this stimulating stuff. So yeah, really appreciate you two. We'll see if later on in the event you have any questions or reflections for the speakers. And you both have some love in the chat, so check that out. And now we are very happy and honored to introduce our other speakers for the second half of the evening here. I like pretending there's a real stage, calling up on stage. You will meet Jacqueline Jennings, who is of mixed heritage, Cree, Anishinaabe, Métis, and European settler descent. Jacqueline is an impact investment professional, a decolonial facilitator, and an entrepreneurship educator, and was introduced to us at Groundswell through Vidya, who worked with Jacqueline at Radius, another social venture incubator in the city here. And then we have Laura Kozak, another collaborator of Groundswell's. Laura Kozak grew up in Alberta on Treaty 7 territory and has relatives from the Ukraine and other parts of Europe. We met her through her work at Emily Carr University, where she's a design researcher, a teacher, and a community organizer, and also does a lot of cool work in public space. And we've collaborated with Laura in a grad residency program that she leads with some really fantastic students that we've had the pleasure of teaching. And finally, you'll get to know Vidya Crawley a little more, who is Groundswell's CEO and lead educator, who is here doing her work in a business school, subverting business as usual, and bringing the team, leading the team in ways of working that are rooted in relational principles, social emotional learning, and strengths-based approaches. So I'm very excited to have you all here with us. And you may have opportunity to toggle your view there. Now I'm like, is this webinar, is this a thing where you can go between speaker and gallery view? And I will start off. So we got together a couple of weeks ago to have a dinner party, which is how we get to know our guest speakers a little better and also give them a chance to get to know each other more before sort of popping up on stage and seeing each other for the first time, whether that's virtual or in person. So I'm going to start off with the question that I started off with at the dinner party is, first of all, introduce yourself a little bit more, let us know where you're located and what land you live, work, and create on. And then just when we sent you that invitation and inviting you to a conversation on slow work, what excited you about that theme? Sort of what made you say yes? What came to mind when you heard that this was the topic of our conversation? So Jacqueline, you can kick us off.
I'm really enjoying listening to everyone who spoke, and Paul, I might get you to prompt me again because I feel like this is the time of night where I can remember like the last thing you said, but not the first. Thank you. Tansei, Jacqueline Jennings, Indigenous. My name is Jacqueline Jennings. I am of mixed heritage. I am Cree, Anishinaabe, Métis, and of European settler descent. And My family, the Cree side of my family was forcibly displaced from around Moose Factory a few generations ago. So our home communities are spread out. I have a lot of family in Northern Alberta around Lac La Biche, Cree Nation, Métis family who fled prosecution for rebellion in Montana, a good group of cousins in Peguis, First Nation in Winnipeg, and I was born and raised as a guest in Squamish Nation territory, where I currently live. And yeah, I don't want to repeat what you said in the introduction. So I think when this topic arose, it's something, slow work is something that has been on my mind for a number of years. Before I started my current career, I was a leadership coach. I am a leadership coach for almost a decade, working with entrepreneurs and innovators. And you know, the issues of internalizing dominant culture and white supremacy are something that I see every day. And most of the entrepreneurs that I've had the privilege of working with in my career belong to communities that have been marginalized, whether they're people of color or youth or disabled entrepreneurs, or many of those intersecting identities. I find that most of the dominant culture narratives around productivity and work, once you scratch the surface, they just don't ring true for those people. And so as a lifelong haver of problem with authority, I began unconsciously a decolonial journey about 5 years ago, but my Girl Guides leader would probably say it began much earlier in questioning, why do we do things like this? Why do we think this is the best practice? Whose ideas are these? Are they mine? Are they serving me? And so uncovered a lot of things about hustle and grind culture and productivity and just aimless consumption and growth that I really want to challenge and interrupt in my work, in my personal work, to be anti-racist and to be on a decolonial journey, and to reclaim certain aspects of my culture and traditional ways of knowing and being, and contemporary ways of knowing and being, an Indigenous femme on stolen land in a colonial, late stage capitalist reality. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Just some light things to start us
Light
off.
things, yeah.
Yes. Well, that's why we're here. Yeah, so happy you're here with us tonight, Jacqueline. Laura, over to you. Who, speaking of time, is even later, coming in from the east coast of Turtle Island.
Hi everyone. Yeah, it's late here. I'm joining you from a place that's not all that familiar to me, in a rural part of New Brunswick, Wolastoqiyik, where I'm visiting some relatives of my own with my mother, and some of the places that she spent as a young child. I live and work in Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, in Strathcona, not so far from Groundswell. And being a neighbor of so many of you is a really important part of my life, and kind of how I understand like my work and what role I can play in contributing to our neighborhood. My relatives are from the Ukraine and the Netherlands and Ireland. And as I've been here, I've been kind of walking through a lot of that history with my mom, who also has Alzheimer's and is kind of cataloging back through some of her earliest memories, and other relatives have been helping us kind of piece that together too. So I've been learning a lot about my own family's history and complicities in the colonialism of this land, and that's been like a really important part of the last several years, but really concentrated and intensified in the last few days. And so I'm kind of processing that in real time too. There are so many ways of understanding slow work that I think are held amongst this group. Rita and Danielle, thank you for opening up this session with such beautiful introductions to your practice, and everyone at Groundswell for just hosting tonight in a way that is so full of care and thoughtfulness and consideration for different ways of kind of coming together, even in the sort of sometimes sort of sterile space of a Zoom room. You found ways to kind of warm it up a lot, and I appreciate that a lot. I so often in my own work at a university, which is like a highly sort of programmed, institutionalized way of learning, am kind of confronting how we navigate pace and time. And so when you asked about this event of slow work, I was just like flooded with happiness that you asked that question. And I feel like navigating pace and sort of resisting urgency is a massive part of what my energy goes into, and in sort of like being the kind of windbreak for students to shield them from some of those pressures, but it's often very invisible. And so to be asked that question, to reflect on slow work and to hear from others is just like such a, I felt like my sails got filled with wind when you asked that question. So I'm coming to this with like a lot of optimism that you're hosting conversations like this.
Thanks so much, Laura. So it's so good to know that this is on the minds of people like you, and everyone who showed up at this event. Obviously, like slow work is something that we don't really hear about, but obviously it touched a nerve with folks who showed up, and obviously with our speakers. So it's so awesome to see that happening in university spaces, that there's folks thinking about these things and doing something about them. And Vidya, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vidya Crawley. I go by pronouns she, her, and they, them. I am a second-generation South Asian immigrant and settler. I am coming to you from the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I live really close to a Squamish landmark called Smam Kochus, which is at the foot of Howe Street by False Creek. And wow, getting to go after all those amazing insights and craft that was shared. Slow work, yeah. So when I became the CEO of Groundswell about 1.5 years ago, as a team, we took our time creating our principles of kind of how we bring our values into our work and how we want to show up. And slow work was one that emerged. And before that, I think slow work was kind of like my little secret. I knew that I really liked phases of deep work, and I like to have like expansive space and time around what I do. A lot of that is kind of purpose-based work, relationship building, nurturing and the work of empathy, which often gets kind of devalued, especially when it's seen only in the context of time. And I would do those while still appearing to be the kind of hardworking, fast-paced environment, entrepreneurial person. And I would take my rest time and be less visible during those times. So I kind of kept it as a little secret, like, haha, no one's going to see how much rest I actually take, or all the times I slow down. They're only going to see my outputs and my productive times. And here it was thinking about, how do we create the right conditions for emergence? I kind of like to think about organizational culture in workplaces and businesses and in social ventures. How do we create the conditions for things to emerge when we start to divest from urgency, and when we start to step outside of the model of scarcity that capitalism creates, which is that our work is always guided and measured in time, and our outputs are always measured in money. How can we be guided by things other than time? How can we be guided by our values, by our relations, by our unique strengths? And so the last year and a half have been slowing down to allow for that, to kind of nurture different team members' strengths and unique talents, to take time building relationships. I think it's lovely when we host these events to see folks that we've collaborated with, like Laura and Jacqueline in different spheres, and Danielle and Rita, both being alum from our programs. So just honoring relationships, and that we come into each other's lives, not just for a brief moment, but there's ways that those can continue. So spending the time to actually build those relationships and to honor and value them. Slow work really kind of hit home personally in a different way this year, when I had major health issues and was in hospital and had to be on a health leave. And that was the moment when my slow work had to become public. And so I set my out of office notification. I put a sloth GIF in it. I love sloths, and you'll see it in the collage that we share later. And I was very honest about not only being on leave, but afterwards, that I couldn't be at full capacity. And I had to deal with the feelings that come with that. Can I really hold on to a leadership role if I'm only working 3 days a week? And what does it look like if I'm just take time in getting back to people and am not going to be immediately showing like outputs and productivity? And so it was a chance to, it was a little bit scary, but a good experience to kind of share what that slowing down looked like publicly. And then also valuing the seasonality of our work. So at Groundswell, we talk about something called the learning spiral, where we go through different seasons of learning and growth because it's not linear. So I love like the spring season of curiosity and learning and growth, and the summer season where the outcomes of that are visible. And then the fall season, we are kind of reaping the rewards and harvesting what we created, but we're also letting go. And then winter is that place of hibernation. So I allowed myself to kind of take that period of hibernation, supported by my team, and have been thinking about slow work as like, how do we value like the winter season of our work? Like in nature, we have that fallow period, which is really integral. You can't have spring without going through winter. So how can we honor the winter of our work, where sometimes we can't even see or know what is going to come ahead, but to allow ourselves to sit with that and be guided by something other than time. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vidya. And one of Groundswell's, we're big fans of someone named Trisha Hersey from the NAP Ministry. And if you are not following the Nap Ministry on Instagram or Twitter, you need to, yes, major hearts. You need to do this. And if you're not on social media, you're already winning in the slow work game. So, Vidya really wanted to share this video with you all to get a peek into really radical approaches to slow work, which is straight up rest and naps. So we'd love to introduce you to the Nap Ministry. I'm just gonna make sure I don't cause some major like echo thing happening with our computer setup here. And
The doors of the Nap Temple are open. Won't you come? There's this healing portal for us to go into, which is called rest, which is naps. And we believe that our healing can visit us while we are napping. In that portal, you can gain new ideas. And once you come out of the portal, those ideas can now be cemented. And so in that way, I think it's important for people to look at rest as a healing tool, but also a tool for empowerment. This is a counter narrative to the lie that we all aren't doing enough. Rest came as a healing place for me. It came to save me. And I thought to myself, because I'm a community organizer, this could help other people. You know, like I'm being saved by naps. Like, what would this look like in a collective? What would it look like if the community could be healed and can learn more about this as a resistance movement? But I want you to use this opportunity to meditate, to stop, to slow down, to be still, to luxuriate, to recline, to rest, you know, to lay back, to just give yourself that 40 minutes of space to do that. Rest, nap, dream. All of the trauma that's happening to us on a scale here in America, I really believe that rest could offer us a space to go there, invent, imagine, and come out of those rest states with new ideas on how we can help to solve issues, how we can help to heal each other, how we can really come together as a community and as a culture to help fight back against all of the things that are like affecting us in a negative way. The doors of the Nap Temple are open. Won't you come? Won't
yes, the doors to the Nap Temple are open. And where are we here? Whoa. Okay, we're having some weird screen things happening over here behind the scenes. Oh my goodness, when she said, like, can you imagine if someone, like, your instructions from the person who's standing in the room is like, sleep, rest, nap, dream. How powerful is that? So glad you found that video, and there's so many, like, there's so much around there of like expectations of what we're supposed to do, what makes us human. In our Leadership for Social Change course, we talk about being human beings instead of human doings. I'm kind of riffing back on what was said in the intros around like what we measure things in, like time, money, and what we value. So I just want to bring that back to you, Vidya, around like the expectations of work culture. And I know you have reflections in particular as a person of color and the different expectations that comes around that, and like the racialized aspect of productivity and work and rest and expectations. Yeah, and like bearing the brunt of those things as a person of color.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. What sticks with me from that video and And the work of Nat Ministry is when Trisha Hersey says that burnout is a social justice issue. Because we're often told that burnout is kind of an individual issue or problem, like it's your fault, you're just not managing yourself properly, you're not doing enough self-care. But that really masks all the ways that certain folks who hold marginalized identities are expected to show up above and beyond, or that you need to work 3 times as hard for half the reward. So I wonder if we can reframe burnout and also reframe care, thinking about what expectations are placed on folks and folks who are held to perhaps unrealistic standards of having to achieve according to what dominant culture says is successful, while also honoring their own ways, while also trying to be seen in systems that don't value them. I don't know if some of you have heard of burnout also being termed as compassion fatigue. So for those who work in the social sector, in nonprofits, in social justice work, that there is an expectation of having to be selfless and having to constantly please those around you. And while it's work that you might be passionate about, you're also told that you're supposed to do it without any personal expectations. And so thinking of who the expectations of compassion work and care work and nurturing kind of fall on, and how are we perpetuating those expectations? Or maybe, like Laura was suggesting, how do we kind of act as a buffer or shield with folks that we work with? So an interesting thing that we all have in common is that we support folks through some kind of lab or incubator, or even, like Daniela says, a bubble. We're all nurturing these bubbles of like what alternative futures of work could look like. So I'd love to hear, Jacqueline, from you, working with Indigenous entrepreneurs with Fireweed, and then Laura working with students at Emily Carr, how you can, help to see what those expectations are and kind of subvert them as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think to begin with, I always start off when leading groups, and particularly the Fireweed Fellowship is an accelerator program for Indigenous entrepreneurs, femme, non-binary, two-spirit, trans, and women, basically everyone who's not a cis man. That's an easier way to say it, I think, at this point. And working with entrepreneurs and innovators who are beyond idea stage in their business or their project, and generally borrowing from sort of the dominant culture accelerator model. Even that word, is so weighted in productivity, like we're going to add fuel and then you're going to go faster. You're going to accelerate. So really pausing at the beginning to make sure that we have a clear picture of how the group is resourced, what expected roadblocks could come up for them, and then really being unapologetic about how we allocated resources as a team, not only for our participants, but for our team as well. And one thing that we were very clear on, because we got to take a lot of space for reflection and fleshing out, because we were doing something that had never been done before. Our team took a lot of time. If you're designing a decolonial curriculum, you got to do it in a different way. So we went out on the land, we spent time getting into relationship with one another. We talked about what it would look like for each of us on the team individually to not be operating in scarcity or bleeding for the cause, which tends to be another badge of honor if you work in social justice or in nonprofit, is like, the less you're sleeping, the more you're the more you're suffering, maybe the better social justice thing you're doing. And we just wanted to completely, in particular in the nonprofit industry, which for decades after being established was held up by white women who didn't need the income because it was expected that they had wealthy husbands. We just wanted to undo all of that. So figuring out how to resource everyone at the beginning and then drawing our awareness into the ways that we've already internalized white supremacy and this focus on productivity, faster, more, because we have this awareness that there's going to be all these external expectations. So we better get clear on which are real and which are self-imposed. And a lot of the ways that we did that was setting a bit of a baseline. So we would take everyone through a colonial impact timeline so that we can really look at the black and white of like why we're experiencing some of the challenges in our work, legislated intergenerational dispossession of land, legislated poverty for generations, and all of the other impacts that come along with colonization and the legacy of residential schools. So a baseline of truth telling, and then building capacity on that. So a lot of our work, when I think about going slow and then the opposite of like going fast, when I think about moving really fast, I think about panic and trauma response, like flight, the fight and flight. And so we spent a lot of time creating community agreements about how we wanted to be together. And then also sharing dozens and dozens of ways that we can regulate our nervous systems to come back into that. When I think about slow, I think about that regulated nervous system, about that space of homeostasis, or what we call the window of resilience, or not being in a panic. And so that looked like talking about how our ancestors would have approached our business, and also right sizing our expectations around what we want to achieve. And that's something in my leadership coaching, and then more so in my recent work, that has come up is especially in the way that our public markets and public companies are set up. There's a legal obligation for the entire executive and leadership team to maximize shareholder return quarterly. There's no that's enough line. Like there's no to this point and then we pause, or then that's enough, everybody, and we all go home. It's just perpetual, indefinite growth or infinite growth. And so spending some time visioning for what feels full and fulsome and like enough for us on an individual level. What do we want to achieve for ourselves and for our communities? And what can we realistically produce without sacrificing? And in that truth telling, naming all of the ways that particularly Indigenous femmes have already sacrificed for dominant culture and the collective, and inviting in that pause, and that can feel, even in and of itself, like going really, really slowly. Like, when are we going to get to the marketing or the supply chain stuff? But every single time I take the time, whether it's with our team to go out on the land and get into a relationship, and we generally we'll do that. We'll spend 2 days together, and we spend a day and a half not talking about work at all, and then we do everything in the last sort of quarter of our time together. And every time we just laugh and say, like, at different points in the beginning time, I was worried that we weren't going to get enough done, but it always just goes, it comes together perfectly, like in harmony towards the end, because we've invested in what really matters. And Vidya, just want to mention, and it might even be a quote from the founder of the NAP ministry, but this idea that like screaming community care or screaming self-care at people who need community care is like how we fail them in movements, is something that I think about all the time. It's like a bath and a glass of wine and a face mask is not going to do it if you don't have childcare or if you're living with housing insecurity. Also this year have spent a lot of time looking at models of community care and reciprocity. That's it for now.
Well, there's so many things that you said in there that I want to kind of like think about some more and unpack. But Vidya, as you were kind of asking that question, I was thinking back on something that Rita said, which is sort of like when moving slowly is seen as sort of like evidence of injury. And in my work within a university, I think there's sort of like markers all over the place of the speed or the level of productivity at which you're expected to move. And that ignores all of the things that students bring into that space from their own lives, whether it means that they've like lived with trauma for many generations, or they've arrived here a week before and are just sort of like reeling to adjust to a totally new way of living. The university is just sort of like this constantly moving set of expectations to meet kind of these like artificial signals of whether you're working hard enough or producing enough, and that's by design. And I think in my work in trying to sort of like shield students, little groups at a time, from that way of thinking about time, I look for things like whether students are actively opting into what we're doing together, not in service of something like a grade, but whether they're showing up over and over because they want to be there. And that's like a big signal for me that there's something that's nourishing to them there that isn't kind of like coming from a transactional reward that settings like that are just full of all the time. And that active opting in is something that I think has to be defined by the group, and we can do that in formal ways through group agreements, but we can also just do that through like careful observation of each other and sort of like returning to that attentiveness over and over again, which I also think that a setting like a university doesn't ask for very often. And that idea of like not being in a state of panic that you were talking about, Jacqueline, I think like universities, accelerators, incubators, they all like kind of celebrate that state of panic or that way of working across pace. And I think it sort of perpetuates the myth that moving slowly is equivalent to not working hard or not getting the work done. And in our last conversation, Jacqueline, you were talking about what you just mentioned, which is sort of like, what slow work can we do that allows us to move quickly when there truly is a sort of like collective need for urgency. And I was thinking a lot about that in between our last conversation and now, and thinking about scenarios like, I don't know, like a storm or a disaster or something, and how different it is when you have built a trusting relational community around you, and how that does allow you to improvise and move quickly and be nimble, because you know and trust people already, and you've laid that groundwork in a very slow, non-urgent way. And Vidya, I think you've asked before, like, what is urgency in service of? And I think that's like such a good question to bring into all of these spaces of like when we're all in this kind of grind culture celebrating perfectionism and productivity, to ask over and over again what that's in service of is huge.
Hey, thank you all. Sorry, I'm laughing because I don't know how to do all the tech over here. But I uber appreciate all of the reflections, because I feel like we often get to learn from each other. Like I might have thought a piece of this and a piece of that, but having other folks that think about it in a more fleshed out way of each piece that I might have touched on, you know, in my studies or Instagram life. I really appreciate, and also how just thinking that even in this space, we're not only going slow, but also perhaps looking at what collective care looks like, as we're talking about, you know, how is it in service of not only the communities that we're in, but in this little bubble that we're in right now, and how we're helping each other grow there. So one of the things that comes to mind for me is, what mindset shifts did you have to do in order to move into what slow work looks like for you now? Because it sounds like, Jacqueline, you talked about having to process the legacy of colonialism, and Laura, you talked about the school, and Vidya, you talked about how this was like your secret, you know? So how did we get to these points? And what were mental or emotional hurdles you had to overcome in order to do slow work as it shows up for you? Because we are full beings, and sometimes we talk about this cognitively, but sometimes our bodies can't handle what our brains are, you know, wanting to get to. So if you'd like to share on that, I'd love to hear.
And speaking of brains getting to things, we're just gonna put those prompts in the chat so you can refer to them there, because I know we get absorbed in what other people are saying, and going on a tangent is more than welcome. But if you do want to come back to the original question, which is a great question, thank you. Yeah, whoever wants to start off with that.
I can start, and I'm gonna say what the hurdle is, and then I have many caveats, because I think sometimes the idea of shifting a mindset or overcoming a hurdle sounds really like the journey is done. It is not, especially in this case. But to go back to that enoughness, to getting really clear on what is enough, and doing the self-inquiry to be able to distinguish scarcity mindset that I have absorbed from living in dominant capitalist culture that tells me I need a new wardrobe every season, or I'm old and unattractive, that I need, you know, tropical vacations, that I need an Instagrammable home, that I need to be able to, you know, do all of these, like have this, this wealth, this body that can do all of the things. You know, I'm a mother, so then there's like a whole layer of implied or imposed ideals. And so I feel sometimes like Brene Brown, because I always talk about trauma, and she always jokes about like she's the worst person to sit next to on a plane, because she's like, I study grief and shame. And it's so like any conversation with me always goes back to trauma, but that was really the main mindset shift in figuring out what it feels like in my body when I'm in scarcity, what it feels like when there's a real threat, and what it feels like when there's an imagined threat. because my trauma responses are actually really helpful. They prevent me from getting run over by a car, or where I live, attacked by a cougar, or, you know, burning my hand on the stove. But they also will flare up when I have to speak in front of a group of people where I'm not actually in physical danger, or when I have to ask for a raise. And so getting really clear and then resourcing myself with tools to come back out of the, what happens is when I have a trauma response to a real or imagined threat, you know, I leave the prefrontal cortex of my brain, I move into my amygdala, I lose access to my executive function and logic and reasoning and language. So often I don't have the words that I need to express myself in the situation. So coming back into homeostasis has been a huge mindset shift for me. And then once that sort of foundational piece was in place for me, I think there's and when we talked, Laura and Vidya, I feel like we all related. In fact, I grabbed this. This is my moon calendar that sits beside my desk. And so finding ways to move into ways of being that feel reflective of seasonality and of cycles. And so recognizing that I can't move at a turtle's pace all the time in the work that I do. There are moments of urgency. There are times of high energy and productivity or harvesting. It's not always winter. You know, it's not always that quiet, dark, reflective space, because that to me feels like depression. And I've been there. So that mindset shift around seasonality, including cycles of like decomposition and then reciprocity and death, and then energy being spread out and going back into other areas. And I'll just share one little anecdote. I was just recently up in Northern Vancouver Island visiting some communities that I work with, and was in ceremony with Kamina, who's a elder from Ahousaht, and he shared a story with me and gave me permission to share sort of the essence of it, which is his teachings from his mother about how when the salmon run up the estuary, up the rivers and the creeks, that's not the spawning ground isn't their final destination. They're not being drawn to the creeks and the rivers. They're actually being drawn to the forest, because the bears and the eagles are going to take their bodies when they're done into the forest, and they're going to decompose, and that's actually going to feed the trees and the insects and the smaller animals, and just really help me to think about how I can think more deeply about those cycles of reciprocity and relationality. That's all for now.
Thank you so much.
Vidya, you look like you're about to say something. Do you want to go next?
Sure. Actually kind of echoing a bit about what both of you shared, Jacqueline, on like our nervous systems and trauma responses, and Laura, you were mentioning states of panic, but also how can we take care of ourselves so that in moments where we need to respond to something quickly or urgently, we have access to that. And a mindset shift for me has been reframing what resilience really means. That resilience, the mainstream and dominant culture way of talking about it, is really about celebrating all the ways that we endure systems that are not designed for us or in our best interests. So how we constantly deplete ourselves and overwork and kind of overcome and come back, that's what's celebrated as resilience. Where from a kind of nervous system perspective, like our resilience is a natural way for our bodies to stay in that window of tolerance or that window of resilience. Or I think the activist Kai-Cheng Tom calls it the window of transformation, that we actually have access to everything we need if we can do the things that help us to self-regulate or co-regulate and stay in that space. So our resilience doesn't depend on this sense of like toughness and grit and like constantly enduring, but rather honoring how our bodies are actually designed to work. And so I've been, it also brings up a kind of some identity related questions of, you know, if we're identifying as someone who is resilient or told that I'm resilient because I can keep going. And so now I kind of think, well, what is the cost of the keep going part? And how can I normalize maybe not wanting to always pay that price?
Yeah, I think of that as such a an important leadership capacity to sort of like demonstrate and extend the ability to rest in a way that's integrated with other work. And I think one of my first bosses, who has become my mentor and longtime friend, Sadira Rodriguez, she was like very adamant always that we all like take vacation time. And that was such a small sort of like contained way of working in a particular setting. But it felt like very thirst quenching. And when I think about that now, and like a lot of the people that I work with, a few of whom are here, finding some sort of like collective joy in those moments of rest, of like going to a meeting and working really hard, but then like doubling on a bicycle and going to drink a beer. It just feels like there's this sort of like liberation from needing to kind of stay in that space of working hard all the time. And when you can find others to do that with, whether you're like extending that to people that you're working with, or you find it through kind of kinship networks, I think it reinforces the idea that it's like not just okay to need rest, but that it's like fun and restorative, but it sort of like sends a signal that comes bouncing back that it's like a good thing for everybody all around. And I don't think we get those signals from people all the time. Like Vidya, when you're talking about like finding rest in secret, I sort of wonder like how many people feel like they do have to keep the ways that they kind of like restock themselves hidden from others. And maybe we should like let those things be a little bit more seen.
There's so much. I can't believe we're like speak time. What? Like 10 minutes left? This is ridiculous. What were we thinking with the 2-hour event about slow work? Samita and I were having a laugh in our private chat about this amazing collage thing that we were mentioning earlier on in the event, because they're having major technical difficulties with getting that shared publicly and like editable, even though we've done this before. And we were like, hurry up and work thing. And then we're like, well, this is hilarious. So we will find more creative ways to share some slow work resources. So if anyone here has any resources, articles, songs, a link to like a picture, anything obviously that we can share with a link and that you want to put in the chat, please do, and we'll collect those and we will populate this collage for you, and we'll share it back with the recording for this event. Yes. Yeah, link to the pod. We'll collect all the resources that have been mentioned by the speakers as well. Yeah, and Samina just shared some songs that I'm sad we won't be able to have time to share.
DJ Paula curates these.
I know, I was so excited to share a song during our special collage making slow work song. But I think we want to squeeze as much as we can out of these speakers, knowing it's super late for some of you. And maybe what I want to kind of bring it back to the importance of slow work. Oh, actually, Jacqueline, you brought a very special item that has a lot of slow work related symbolism in it. If you could share that and that story, it would be amazing.
So one of the questions that you sent us that I don't know if we'll get to is how can we advocate collectively against urgency as a characteristic of white supremacy culture? And you know, I do work in academia and I do work in nonprofit and I do work in finance. And in all of those industries, there are people I am accountable to. And some of those people give me large sums of money and then they want to know, I mean, this is being generous. They want to know what I did with it. Generally, they tell me what I can do with it and they want evidence that I have done that. And so with the Fireweed Fellowship and with what Laura said, you said something about like basically protecting the students. Was it as a windbreak? It was like such a beautiful image of like pushing back and creating kind of like a protective, safe space. So in part of that, our team is really clear we don't want to spend a lot of time reporting. And so we let our funders know this year that we would be, instead of creating a report, we'd be creating an artifact. And so we had Nancy Brown and Anishinaabe elder from Northern Ontario, Ottawa, create a star blanket for us. And star blankets are a traditional blanket in Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and a lot of Nishan Cree communities. They used to be made out of buffalo hides, and they would be cut into small pieces and stitched together in this star pattern, or sometimes they're referred to as like creator's eye. I guess the thing to know about star blankets is that when we wear them or when we use them, we believe that our ancestors are with us, and the teachings are that anything it covers is made sacred. And it represents the sacrifice and reciprocal relationship that many of our people, my Métis ancestors, had with the buffalo. And so I'm going to show you what was made. This is the artifact. This is the report on our year-long project. And so Nancy made it round to represent the circle that we spent so much time in together during the pandemic on Zoom, and all of these pieces represent the participants and the way that we are in relationship with one another, the layers of the teachings. And when you look up close, the base fabric kind of looks like footprints or hoof prints, or the pattern that a herd would leave on the ground. And so I just wanted to share this as a way that we can advocate and interrupt some of the pressure of urgency. It takes a long time to make this quilt. And some of the structural ways that institutions can impose their sometimes arbitrary requirements on us. And I didn't have any complaints when we presented it. So I hope that will inspire someone to not write another effing report or one less maybe. Thank you. I'm really honored to and excited to have been able to share that our artifact with you all.
Yes, thank you so much. And to the funders in the room, there's a little message. Thank you so much. And it gives so much, like just sharing that and knowing that others are doing this, like what I said at the beginning of the event, like that there's people out there thinking about slow work and actually applying it in a world that is so run by, as you just said in that question, Jacqueline, like white supremacy culture around urgency, and which keeps us separate from ourselves and our bodies, from the land, like all these things that have come up in this conversation. So Jacqueline, do you want to repeat that question? I would love to bring that to Laura and Vidya.
Laura, Vidya, how can we advocate collectively against urgency or any of the other characteristics of white supremacy?
Well, maybe this is a partial answer to that question, but also like just a reflection on the blanket too, which is that like within this culture, there is so much like work that's not the real work. Like what is writing a report really accomplishing that like contributes to the thing that you're actually trying to achieve? And when there's a way to do that, that actually like response to the genuine values or motivations to come together and work in a way, it's so much less urgent because it's less crowded with all these arbitrary things we have to do. There's less forms to fill out, there's less reports to write, there's less like projects that need 18 versions of a budget. Like it just, all of that stuff crowds out the real work from my perspective. And the more people that see it that way, and the more we can each sort of like question or resist whether it's necessary to constantly kind of like be running in the hamster wheel of fulfilling all of those things, it opens up space for others to have more time, I think, to do the work that's the real work. And that's like the powerful message that the blanket is sending too, like a kind of a refusal to participate in fulfilling those sort of like endless, needless things.
Thank you so much. And I just want to add that I'm going to put them in I'll put a link in the chat, but you reminded me that another characteristic of white supremacy that we're interrupting there is worship of the written word over everything else.
My very small practice in service of that is to stop having meeting minutes. Like I think of things that are just, why does every meeting need to be recorded on paper? And also who are the ones who it's typically expected to do that work, which is often in the lowest paid women or femme presenting folks in the room. So to kind of question what those extra pieces, like Laura said, like the work that's not really our work, but the other work around it, to question those. I don't know if there's any funders in this room, but I'm hoping to maybe push back on that kind of annual reporting that's asked of, and that Jacqueline, your team is doing so wonderfully, by kind of asking like how do we measure and talk about slow work. And in the social sector, so much of it is around like impact measurement, which is often a way to really just extract information from the people that we work with, participants, community members. It doesn't really offer any value to them. It's simply extracting from them so that we can report to funders. And how do we disrupt that so that maybe that process can actually incorporate participants? So at Groundswell, we're starting to look at developmental evaluation that's done in a more equitable way, where folks can share their stories and their learnings and growth in a way that actually serves them, rather than saying, okay, you've been put through this program, now you need to report in a way that serves our funders. So yeah, how can we measure our work in more human ways?
There's a good question for everyone to reflect on. I wish we had another 2 hours here. We'll do a part 2. There's time. But something we want to leave the attendees, so folks watching this with, and of course speakers and everyone else, is this question. So I'll put it in the chat, so you can maybe copy and paste it there and do a note on your computer or something. But what does slow work make space for in your life? And you might want to think about this in relation of how we're often taught that we have to choose work over other things. Like if you've got to cancel that hold in your calendar for something, what's the dynamic there? Makes me think a little bit about, like, we talk about power at Groundswell and power over, and the sort of like, it's almost like the power of work over other forms of things that take up time, that we can spend time on, and also words like spending time, taking time. Like, it's really interesting to reflect on how, like, the language. I know, Laura, you mentioned this came up in our last conversation about this too. And it's interesting to examine like how we talk about time. The language of urgency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I want to say I uber appreciate having heard from everybody. And one of the words that came up a lot is white supremacy culture. So I think I'll include that resource in the stuff that we send out in case this is a new term for you. When we talk about urgency and stuff like that, it's one of the characteristics that comes out of that culture. Worship of the written word was the other one that came up a lot. And that just makes me think of how we have companies or organizations that are now people-centered, and to think, why were they not? What were they centering, if not humans, in the relationships they're building? And that thing that is between me getting to Paula as a human is white supremacy culture, and the filter through which I value who she is and the way that she contributes to this world, or the way that I see myself and contribute to this world. So I encourage you to look at that resource when we include it. So perhaps you'll have a bigger picture of what we were talking about, in case this is new to you as well, because there's so much goodness in this conversation. I want to make sure everybody gets as much as they can out of it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Feel it in your heart, eh? There's so much good stuff here. Thank you all so much, Jacqueline, Laura, Vidya. This is such an amazing conversation. And Danielle and Rita, thank you for giving us, like, offering us all those feelings that I felt them really wash over me, in all sorts of the sounds, the auditory things, the feelings of connections that we had with you in your space and doing what brings you closer to slowing down and sort of seeing yourself in that slowing down. Yeah, Rita, you said, relying on slow work to find your way. So I want to leave you with that. And we will put a song on. Thank you so much, Samita, for all of your support in the chat. Thanks, co-host.
Thank you. Thanks for making it a great first time on the screen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we'll leave you with some music to ease out of here with. So chill. You can turn away from your computer, but maybe listen to the music. And we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Okay,
Have a
I
good
got
evening.
one foot on the beach and the other in the Milky Way. Yeah, I eat the
Thanks, guys. Good night.
but I do it in a silky way. Candy of the earth in a tote ring. I do the floating and let my soul ring. My energy awaken your energy. Mind full of gold thoughts, it's full of dream. Yeah, I know my father. I be at ease in the muddiest waters. I do not know if we close to Nirvana, but mama, I still say to live if you want it in peace. Like to dance alone to the beat of the rebel revolution. Cause when the heat is on and the wind is still, it's all on your will. Chill and be chill. Chill, chill.
Speakers, make sure you check out the chat. There's so much good stuff in there and so much love for you all.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Laura and Rita and Danielle. It was lovely to share this conversation space with you.
Likewise. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Jacqueline. Bye. Thank you so much. People are still bobbing to the music. Bye, Ona. Good night.
See ya.
Oh, I love seeing so many alums here. Thank you all for coming.
Pack it away and I'm lost in the romance. Feeling like a lucky lotus. I'm glowing my way through the motions. Back on my hocus and pocus. The yoga and cocoa for focus. I'm thinking that Yoko can notice my chill. Tranquilo, baby. Got a lot of loving in my lingo, baby. Born with the Buddha in my stilo, baby. Then I hit the little hula like I'm Lilo, baby. Let's go.